The parking lot of the Walmart on 8 Mile Road in Detroit was nearly empty that cold November evening. Most people had rushed home to escape the biting wind that cut through the city like a knife, carrying with it the scent of approaching snow and the metallic tang of industrial air that defined this part of Michigan. But in the far corner, under the flickering light of a street lamp that buzzed with electrical interference, a small figure moved between the few remaining cars with purpose that seemed too heavy for someone so young. She couldn't have been more than 12 years old. Her worn sneakers, once white but now stained with oil and grime from weeks of parking lot work, squeaked against the wet asphalt as she dragged a bucket of soapy water that seemed impossibly heavy for her thin arms. The water sloshed with each step, leaving a trail of sudsy drops that caught the yellow streetlight like tiny fallen stars. Her jacket, clearly too big and probably handed down from someone else, hung loose around her small frame, the sleeves rolled up multiple times to free her hands for work. But what would have caught your attention if you had been there wasn't her size or her clothes or even the late hour. It was the determination in her movements, the way she attacked each car with the methodical precision of someone whose life depended on getting every detail right. And it was the tears that streamed down her cheeks, leaving clean tracks through the grime and exhaustion that had become her daily companions. If you had been there, you might have thought she was just another kid doing chores, maybe earning some spending money for video games or candy. But you would have been wrong, because what you were witnessing was something much more profound, a child carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, fighting a battle that no 12-year-old should ever have to fight, armed with nothing but a bucket of soap and a heart full of desperate love. Her name was Sophia Martinez, and she had been coming to this parking lot every day after school for 3 weeks and 4 days. She knew the exact count because she had been marking each day on a calendar hidden under her mattress, counting down to rent day like a prisoner marking time until execution. Not because she wanted to be here, not because someone was forcing her, but because sometimes when life backs you into a corner and strips away every other option, even a child finds strength they never knew they had. And on this particular evening, as Sophia knelt beside a dirty blue sedan that belonged to someone who worked the night shift at the Ford plant, scrubbing with hands that were red and raw from 3 weeks of cold water and harsh soap, she had no idea that her life was about to change forever. She had no idea that her whispered prayer, barely audible over the Detroit wind that howled between the buildings like a lonely animal, was about to be heard by someone who could actually answer it. Because sometimes, just sometimes, miracles happen in the most unexpected places. And this miracle was about to pull up in a black Mercedes S-Class, driven by a man whose name appeared regularly in the business section of the Detroit Free Press, a man whose wealth could buy entire city blocks, whose charitable foundation had built wings of hospitals, but whose heart was about to be broken and rebuilt by the sight of one small girl's tears. 3 weeks and 5 days earlier, Sophia's world had crumbled in the span of a single morning that started like any other. She had woken up to the sound of her alarm clock, the same tinny beeping that had pulled her from sleep every school day for the past 2 years. She padded to the kitchen in her socks, expecting to find her mother, Elena, already dressed for her early shift at Mickey's Diner on Corktown. Coffee brewing and toast browning in the ancient toaster that only worked if you hit it just right. Instead, she found Elena collapsed on the linoleum floor of their small apartment, her body twisted at an angle that made Sophia's stomach drop with primal fear. Elena's face was gray, her breathing shallow, and when Sophia dropped to her knees and shook her mother's shoulders, Elena's eyes fluttered open with confusion that was somehow more terrifying than if they had stayed closed. "Mama," Sophia whispered, her 12-year-old voice cracking with panic. "Mama, what's wrong? What happened?" Elena tried to sit up, failed, tried again. Her voice when she spoke was weak and distant, like it was coming from very far away. "I'm okay, mija. I got dizzy. Help me up, okay? I'm going to be late for work." But Elena wasn't okay, and Sophia knew it with the terrible clarity that children have when their world is falling apart. The woman who had always been Sophia's rock, who worked double shifts at the diner to keep them afloat after Sophia's father disappeared, who sang while she cooked and danced while she cleaned and somehow always found energy for bedtime stories, even after 14-hour days. That woman was suddenly as fragile as tissue paper, and Sophia felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. The ambulance ride to Detroit Receiving Hospital was a blur of sirens and questions Sophia didn't know how to answer. Insurance information? She knew they had some kind of card, but she'd never seen it. Emergency contacts? There was only Elena. Family medical history? Sophia's father had left when she was 8, and Elena's parents had died when Sophia was too young to remember them. It was just the two of them, the way it had always been. And sitting in that sterile waiting room watching doctors and nurses rush past with expressions of controlled urgency, Sophia felt more alone than she ever had in her life. Dr. Sarah Williams delivered the news with the kind of clinical precision that medical school trains doctors to use. Professional, informative, and somehow completely inadequate for the magnitude of what she was saying. Stage 3 breast cancer. Aggressive. It had been growing silently for months, maybe longer, while Elena worked her double shifts and hid her exhaustion behind smiles and determination. The good news, Doctor, Williams said, her voice gentle but matter-of-fact, is that we caught it before it spread to other organs. With immediate chemotherapy and radiation, the survival rates are very encouraging. Sophia, sitting in a chair that was too big for her in a consultation room that smelled of disinfectant and fear, focused on the word survival, and felt the world tilt sideways. Survival. Which meant there was a possibility of not surviving. The treatment will be intensive, Dr. Williams continued, looking between Sophia and Elena with professional compassion. 6 months of chemotherapy, followed by radiation. Mrs. Martinez, you'll need to take time off work, at least initially. The side effects can be quite severe. Elena's face went pale. Not from the cancer, but from the implications. No work meant no income. No income meant no rent, no utilities, no food. Sophia watched her mother do the same math that was spinning through her own 12-year-old mind. Watched Elena's eyes fill with a desperation that was somehow worse than the cancer diagnosis itself. Doctor, Elena said, her voice steady despite the tears. How much time do I have? I mean, before I have to start treatment? Mrs. Martinez, I need to be very clear about this. We need to start chemotherapy within the next 2 weeks. This type of cancer moves quickly, and delay could significantly impact your prognosis. 2 weeks. Sophia looked at her mother and saw everything Elena was trying not to say. 2 weeks to somehow figure out how they would survive 6 months without income. 2 weeks to solve an impossible equation with no good answers. That night in their small apartment that suddenly felt enormous and empty, Elena sat Sophia down at their kitchen table, the same table where they did homework and ate breakfast and played card games on Sunday afternoons, and tried to explain the unexplainable. Mija, Elena said, her voice strong but her hands shaking as she held Sophia's. We're going to figure this out. You don't worry about anything, okay? Mama's going to take care of everything. I always have, haven't I? Sophia nodded. But she wasn't a little girl anymore. She had stopped being a little girl the moment she found her mother on that kitchen floor. At 12 years old, she understood that sometimes adults said things they hoped were true, not things they knew were true. And she understood that if someone was going to take care of everything, it might have to be her. Elena had always been Sophia's hero. Even before Sophia's father left, walking out on a Tuesday morning when Sophia was 8 with nothing but a duffel bag and a handful of muttered excuses about responsibility and dreams he couldn't achieve while tied down, Elena had been the strongest person Sophia knew. After he left, Elena became something more than strong. She became invincible, or at least that's how it seemed to an 8-year-old girl whose world had just been cut in half. Elena worked double shifts at Mickey's Diner, pulling 16-hour days that left her feet swollen and her back aching. But she always came home with stories about the customers that made Sophia laugh, always found energy to help with homework, always somehow made their small apartment feel like the safest place in the world. Elena worked her way up from waitress to shift supervisor, earning just enough to keep them in their apartment and put food on the table. She saved every penny she could, dreaming of going back to school to become a nurse, talking about the day when things would be easier, when Sophia could have the things other kids had. But that dream seemed impossibly far away now, as Sophia watched Elena struggle to keep down even water after her first chemotherapy session. The treatment that was supposed to save her life was systematically destroying everything else: her strength, her energy, her ability to work, her hope. Sophia had been staying with Mrs. Rodriguez, their next-door neighbor, during Elena's hospital visits. Mrs. Rodriguez was kind but overwhelmed with her own grandchildren, and Sophia could see the strain in her eyes. They couldn't impose forever. They couldn't impose much longer. The idea came to Sophia on a Tuesday afternoon, exactly 1 week after Elena's diagnosis, as she walked past the Walmart on 8 Mile Road on her way home from Munger Elementary. She had been walking instead of taking the bus, saving the $2 Elena had given her for bus fare, adding it to the small pile of money growing in her ceramic piggy bank. As she passed the parking lot, Sophia noticed how many cars sat there, row after row of vehicles covered in the grime and salt residue that Michigan winters left on everything. She noticed how some people stood next to their cars with expressions of mild annoyance, probably wishing someone would clean them, but not wanting to pay the $15 or $20 that the professional car wash charged. Sophia stopped walking and stared at those cars, her mind racing with possibility. She had been cleaning cars since she was 10, Elena's old Honda, Mrs. Rodriguez's pickup truck, sometimes neighbors' cars when they needed help. She was good at it, meticulous in the way that only children can be when they care about doing something right. That night, after Elena had fallen asleep exhausted from her second day of chemotherapy, Sophia sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and a calculator, doing math with the desperate precision of someone whose life depended on getting the numbers right. Rent, $800 a month. Elena's medicine, $300 a month, and that was with the insurance they barely qualified for. Groceries, $200 if they were careful. Utilities, $150. Bus fare to the hospital for Elena's treatments, $60 a month. Sophia added the numbers again and again, hoping somehow they would change, hoping the calculator would reveal some mistake that made everything add up differently. But the math was merciless. They needed at least $1,500 a month just to survive, and Elena couldn't work. But if Sophia could clean cars, if she could charge $10 per car, if she could clean 5 cars a day, Sophia's heart raced as she did the calculation. 5 cars a day, 6 days a week, would be $300 a week. $300 a week for 4 weeks was $1,200 a month. It wasn't enough to cover everything, but it was close. It was hope. The next day, Sophia used the $15 she had saved from bus fare to buy supplies from the dollar store on Grand River. A bucket, car soap, microfiber cloths, glass cleaner. She walked to the Walmart parking lot with her heart hammering against her ribs, terrified that someone would tell her to leave, terrified that no one would want their car cleaned by a kid, terrified that she would fail before she even started. Her first customer was Mrs. Patricia Washington, a nurse from Henry Ford Hospital who was heading into work for the night shift. She had parked her Honda Civic next to a light pole, and as she gathered her things from the back seat, Sophia approached with her bucket and supplies, her voice shaking with nervousness. "Excuse me, ma'am," Sophia said, her words tumbling over each other. "Would you like me to clean your car? I do a really good job, and it's only $10 for a full wash and detail." Mrs. Washington looked at Sophia, really looked at her, and saw something that made her pause. Maybe it was the way Sophia held herself, straight-backed despite her nervousness. Maybe it was the professional way she had organized her supplies. Or maybe it was something in Sophia's eyes, a seriousness that seemed too old for her young face. "Honey," Mrs. Washington said gently, "it's getting dark and it's a school night. Shouldn't you be home?" Sophia's prepared story tumbled out in a rush. "I'm saving money for college. My guidance counselor says it's never too early to start, and my mom says hard work builds character." It wasn't entirely a lie. Sophia did want to go to college, and Elena had always preached the value of hard work. But it wasn't the whole truth either, and Sophia felt the weight of that partial deception like a stone in her stomach. Mrs. Washington studied Sophia for another moment, then nodded. "All right, baby. Show me what you can do." For the next 45 minutes, Sophia worked on that Honda Civic like it was the most important car in the world. She washed every surface twice, cleaned the windows inside and out, vacuumed the interior, and wiped down the dashboard until it shone. She worked with the kind of meticulous care that most adults would have found exhausting, but Sophia attacked every task with fierce determination. When she was finished, the Honda looked like it had just rolled off the lot. Mrs. Washington walked around the car in amazement, running her fingers along surfaces that sparkled under the parking lot lights. "Honey," she said, pressing a $10 bill into Sophia's hand. "You do beautiful work. Real beautiful work." She paused, then added another $5 bill. "You keep this up and you're going to do just fine in life." Those words, "You do beautiful work," became Sophia's mantra through the first week. She printed them in her memory and replayed them every time her hands started to crack from the cold water. Every time kids from school saw her and whispered among themselves. Every time the security guard told her she couldn't solicit business on private property and she had to move to the far edge of the lot. By the end of the first week, Sophia had earned $87. It wasn't the $150 she had hoped for, but it was more money than she had ever earned in her life, and it felt like the beginning of something important. By the second week, word had started to spread. Mrs. Washington had told other nurses at the hospital, and they started seeking Sophia out, impressed by the meticulous care she took with every vehicle. Sophia discovered that the secret wasn't just cleaning, it was caring. She wiped down every surface like it mattered, checked every detail like each car belonged to someone she loved, because in a way, they did. Each car represented hope. Each payment brought her family one step further from disaster. Sophia developed a system. She would arrive at the Walmart parking lot at 4:30, as soon as school let out. She would work until 7:30, when the security guard's shift ended and his replacement was less tolerant of her presence. She cleaned cars with assembly line efficiency but artisan attention to detail. Wash, rinse, dry, vacuum, windows, final inspection. Every car received the same careful treatment, whether it was a rusted pickup truck or a luxury sedan. She learned the rhythms of the parking lot, which spots got the most traffic, which customers were in a hurry, and which ones would pay extra for interior detailing. She learned to read weather reports and position herself accordingly. People were more likely to want their cars cleaned on sunny days, right before weekends, and especially before holidays. But learning the business of car cleaning was easier than learning to carry the weight of her family's survival. By the third week, Sophia had earned nearly $400, but the math still didn't work. Elena's condition was getting worse, not better. The chemotherapy was destroying the cancer, but it was also destroying Elena's strength, her appetite, her ability to contribute anything to their survival. Sophia started working longer hours, arriving earlier and staying later. She worked through light rain and cold that made her fingers numb. She worked when she had headaches and when she was so tired she could barely stand. She worked because stopping meant giving up, and giving up meant losing the only parent she had left. The other kids at school started to notice. Sophia's best friend, Jessica, asked why she always looked tired, why she never had money for lunch anymore, why her hands were always red and rough. Sophia deflected with half-truths and changed subjects, but she could see the concern in Jessica's eyes growing stronger every day. Mrs. Johnson, Sophia's math teacher, noticed too. She asked Sophia to stay after class one afternoon, sitting across from her at the same kind of desk where Elena had received her cancer diagnosis. "Sophia," Mrs. Johnson said gently, "is everything all right at home? You seem distracted lately, and your grades are starting to slip." Sophia looked down at her hands that were cracked and raw from cold water and harsh soap, hands that told the story she couldn't share. "Everything's fine, Mrs. Johnson. I'm just tired. I've been staying up late studying." Mrs. Johnson studied Sophia's face with the kind of attention that good teachers develop, the ability to see past what students say to what they actually mean. "Sophia, if there's anything going on, anything at all, you know you can talk to me, right? Sometimes families go through difficult times, and there are resources available to help." For a moment, Sophia almost broke, almost let the words spill out, about Elena's cancer, about the impossible math of survival, about the weight she was carrying that no 12-year-old should have to bear. But then she thought about Elena's pride, about the way her mother's face lit up when Sophia brought home good grades, about the promise they had made to take care of each other. "I'm okay, Mrs. Johnson. Really. I'll try to get more sleep." But Sophia wasn't okay, and by the fourth week the exhaustion was taking its toll in ways that went beyond tired eyes and slipping grades. She was losing weight from skipping meals to save money, She was falling behind in school because she spent her evenings working instead of studying, and she was carrying a secret that grew heavier every day, a burden that was changing her from the inside out. On this particular November evening, Sophia had been working for 3 hours and 27 minutes. She had cleaned 6 cars and earned $62, her best single day yet. She should have felt proud, accomplished, maybe even hopeful. Instead, she felt the crushing weight of mathematics that never seemed to work in her favor. $62 was good, but it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. Elena needed medicine that cost more than Sophia could make in a month of perfect days. The rent was due in 5 days, and they were still $400 short. The utilities notice had arrived that morning, threatening disconnection in 2 weeks. And Elena was getting sicker, not better, sleeping 16 hours a day and barely keeping down the few bites of food she managed to eat. Sophia finished cleaning the last car in her row, a silver Ford Focus that belonged to someone who worked the evening shift at the Home Depot next door, and sat back on her heels, looking at her hands. They were red and raw, with small cuts from the metal edges of car trim and permanent stains from grease that no amount of soap could remove. The November wind cut through her thin jacket like ice, and she realized she had been crying without knowing it. The parking lot was almost empty now, just a few scattered vehicles under the fluorescent lights that buzzed and flickered with electrical interference. The sound of distant traffic mixed with the hum of the Walmart's refrigeration units, creating an urban symphony that had become the soundtrack to her new life. Sophia pulled her knees to her chest and let the tears come fully now. All the fear and exhaustion and responsibility she had been carrying for 3 weeks and 4 days, pouring out of her in quiet sobs that echoed off the empty asphalt. In that moment, she wasn't a determined young entrepreneur or a hero fighting to save her family. She was just a scared little girl who missed having a mother who could take care of everything, who missed being 12 years old instead of carrying the weight of adulthood on shoulders that weren't built for it. "Please," she whispered to the empty parking lot, to the gray Detroit sky that was heavy with approaching snow, to whoever might be listening in the vast universe that had suddenly become so cold and indifferent. "Please, I don't know what to do anymore. I'm trying so hard, but it's not enough. It's never going to be enough. Please help my mama. Please help us. I don't want her to die. I can't lose her too. I can't do this by myself." The wind caught her words and scattered them across the asphalt, mixing them with the city sounds of distant sirens and the rumble of trucks on the freeway. Sophia wiped her eyes with the back of her sleeve, a sleeve that smelled like car soap and exhaustion, and started to gather her cleaning supplies. Tomorrow was another day, another chance to earn something, anything, to keep hope alive for 24 more hours. She didn't notice the black Mercedes S-Class that had been sitting at the far end of the parking lot for the past 15 minutes. She didn't see the man behind the wheel, frozen in place by the sight of her small figure bent over bucket after bucket, working with a determination that put most adults to shame. She didn't know that someone had been watching her story unfold, had seen the way she treated every car like it mattered, had heard the quiet desperation in her whispered prayer. Robert Chen had built his first company in a garage in Dearborn 23 years ago, using borrowed money and the kind of desperate optimism that only comes from having nothing left to lose. Now at 45, he owned Chen Technologies, a software empire that employed 12,000 people across 3 states and had made him one of the wealthiest men in Michigan. His net worth was something most people couldn't even conceptualize, the kind of wealth that appeared in Forbes lists and charity galas, that built hospital wings and funded scholarship programs, that could solve problems with the stroke of a pen. But sitting in his car on that November evening, watching a 12-year-old girl work herself to exhaustion while tears streamed down her face, Robert felt something he hadn't experienced in years. He felt small. He felt humbled. He felt like the universe was showing him something important that he had been too busy to notice. Robert had been on his way home from a board meeting at the Renaissance Center, taking the back route through the neighborhoods where he had grown up, when he spotted Sophia. At first he thought he was seeing things. A child, alone, cleaning cars in a Walmart parking lot as darkness fell over Detroit. It didn't make sense. Kids didn't do that kind of work anymore, not in his experience. Kids played video games and worried about social media and complained about homework. But as he pulled closer and watched Sophia work, really watched her, he saw something that broke his heart and amazed him at the same time. This wasn't a kid playing around or doing some community service project for school credit. This was a child who was working like her life depended on it, with the kind of desperate efficiency that Robert recognized from his own childhood, from the days when his immigrant parents worked 3 jobs between them just to keep food on the table. Robert sat in his Mercedes for 15 minutes, watching Sophia clean car after car with meticulous care that would have impressed professional detailers. He watched her count crumpled bills with the seriousness of an accountant managing a corporate budget. He watched her wipe her eyes when she thought no one was looking, then go back to scrubbing with renewed determination that seemed to come from some inexhaustible well of love and responsibility. And when he heard her prayer, quiet and desperate and heartbreaking in its honesty, he knew he couldn't drive away. He knew that this moment, this encounter, was something more than coincidence. Robert Chen had grown up in these same neighborhoods, the son of immigrants who had fled political upheaval in Taiwan with nothing but suitcases and dreams. His parents, David and Mei Chen, had worked brutal hours, his father at a factory that made auto parts, his mother cleaning office buildings at night, to give their children chances they never had. Robert remembered what it felt like to carry adult worries in a child's heart, to watch your parents struggle and feel helpless to change anything, to understand that your family's survival depended on everyone contributing whatever they could. He remembered being Sophia's age and working at his uncle's restaurant, washing dishes and bussing tables for 12 hours on weekends, his hands red and raw from industrial soap, his back aching from reaching into deep sinks. He remembered the way other kids looked at him when they saw him working, the mixture of pity and superiority that made him feel ashamed of his family's struggles. But he also remembered the customers who treated him with kindness, who saw past his circumstances to his potential. He remembered Mrs. Henderson, the high school guidance counselor who helped him apply for scholarships, who believed in him when he didn't believe in himself. He remembered the college professor who gave him a job in the computer lab, who taught him programming languages that would eventually become the foundation of his empire. Robert had never forgotten where he came from, but watching Sophia work reminded him of something he had perhaps lost along the way. The immediacy of struggle, the way desperation could drive someone to impossible feats of determination. His charitable foundation donated millions every year to education and poverty relief, but those donations were abstract, removed from the day-to-day reality of families fighting for survival. This was different. This was personal. This was a 12-year-old girl who reminded him of himself, working alone in a parking lot with nothing but hope and determination, carrying weight that no child should have to bear. Robert turned off his engine and stepped out of the Mercedes, his $5,000 Tom Ford suit and Italian leather shoes feeling absurd in this setting. The November wind cut through his wool coat, a coat that cost more than most families spent on clothing in a year, and he realized how long it had been since he had felt genuinely cold, since physical discomfort had been anything more than an inconvenience. He walked toward Sophia slowly, not wanting to frighten her, his heart pounding with something that felt like the most important moment of his life. As he got closer, he could see the exhaustion in her posture, the way her small shoulders carried weight that seemed impossible. He could see the meticulous care she took with every surface, the pride she took in her work despite her tears. Sophia looked up when she heard footsteps approaching. Through her tears, she saw a man in an expensive suit walking toward her, and her first instinct was fear. Was she in trouble? Was he going to tell her to leave? Had someone complained about her being there? "Excuse me," Robert said gently, crouching down to her level so he wouldn't tower over her. "I'm sorry to bother you. I was watching you work, and I have to say I'm incredibly impressed. You do absolutely beautiful work." Sophia wiped her eyes quickly with the back of her sleeve, embarrassed to be caught crying by a stranger, especially someone who looked so important and official. "Thank you, sir. Did you want me to clean your car? It's $15 for a full wash and detail, and I promise I'll make it look like new." The business-like tone in her voice, so mature and professional coming from someone so young, nearly broke Robert's heart all over again. Here was a child who had learned to present herself as a professional, who had developed a sales pitch and customer service skills, who spoke with the confidence of someone who had earned every dollar through hard work and excellence. "Actually," Robert said, his voice gentle but serious, "I was wondering if you might have time to talk for a minute. I'd like to hear your story, if you're willing to share it." I have a feeling there's more going on here than just someone who likes to clean cars. Sophia hesitated, her mother's warnings about talking to strangers warring with something in this man's voice that felt safe and genuine. There was something about the way he looked at her, not with pity or judgment, but with a kind of recognition, like he understood something about her situation without her having to explain it. "I don't really have much of a story," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the Detroit wind. "I just clean cars to earn money. It's honest work." "I think there's more to it than that," Robert said, settling cross-legged on the cold asphalt beside her, ruining his expensive pants without seeming to care. "I heard you praying just now. And I think maybe I'm supposed to be here tonight. I think maybe we're supposed to meet." Something in his words and the quiet certainty of his voice made Sophia's carefully constructed defenses crumble. Maybe it was the exhaustion from carrying her secret alone for so long. Maybe it was the kindness in his eyes that reminded her of her father before he left, before disappointment and responsibility drove him away. Maybe it was the desperate hope that someone, anyone, might actually be able to help. Whatever it was, Sophia found herself telling this stranger everything. She told him about finding Elena collapsed on the kitchen floor, about the long ambulance ride to the hospital where she sat alone in waiting rooms that smelled like disinfectant and fear. She told him about Dr. Williams and the words, "Stage 3 cancer," that had rearranged her entire understanding of the world. She told him about the medical bills that seemed to multiply every day like some kind of mathematical virus, about lying awake at night doing calculations that never worked out in their favor. She told him about dropping out of after-school activities she loved, about using her lunch money for cleaning supplies, about the way her hands cracked and bled from the cold water, but she couldn't stop because stopping meant giving up, and giving up meant losing the only parent she had left. She told him about the rent notice and the utility bills and the medicine that cost more than their monthly income, about the way Elena tried to hide how sick the chemotherapy was making her, about the terrible mathematics of survival that no 12-year-old should have to understand. "My mama doesn't know I'm doing this," Sophia whispered, her voice breaking with the weight of her secret. "She thinks I'm at after-school tutoring at the library. She's so sick from the chemo and she already feels guilty that she can't work. She keeps apologizing to me, like it's her fault she got cancer. I don't want her to worry about me, too. I don't want her to feel worse than she already does." Robert listened to every word, his chest growing tighter with each detail, his own childhood memories flooding back with painful clarity. Here was a child who had taken on impossible responsibility with impossible grace, who was sacrificing her childhood to try to save her mother's life, who was carrying adult weight with the kind of love and determination that most adults couldn't muster. "Sophia," he said when she finished, his voice thick with emotion he wasn't trying to hide. "How much money do you need? For everything. The rent, the medicine, the bills, all of it." Sophia looked down at her hands, at the cracks and stains that told the story of 3 weeks and 4 days of desperate work. She had done this calculation so many times it was burned into her memory like multiplication tables. "About $12,000, she whispered. "For the next 6 months until Mama can maybe work again. But that's impossible. I know it's impossible. I can't make that much money cleaning cars. I've been trying to figure out the math, but it doesn't work. It never works." Robert reached into his jacket and pulled out his checkbook, the same checkbook he used to make donations to charity galas and write checks for amounts that appeared in newspaper articles about philanthropy. But this felt different. This felt personal. This felt like the most important check he had ever written. Sophia watched in confusion as he wrote quickly, his Mont Blanc pen moving across the paper with decisive strokes that seemed to carry weight beyond mere numbers. "Sophia," he said, handing her a piece of paper that felt warm from his hands. "Nothing is impossible when people decide to help each other." Sophia looked down at the check in her hands and felt the world spin around her like she was on some cosmic carnival ride. Written in clear, bold numbers that seemed to pulse with their own energy was an amount that made her vision blur with disbelief. $50,000. "Sir," she stammered, her hands shaking so hard the check rustled like autumn leaves. "This has to be a mistake. This is more money than I've ever seen. This is more money than I knew existed." "It's exactly what it's supposed to be," Robert said firmly. his voice carrying the kind of certainty that built business empires and changed lives. That's enough to cover your mother's treatment, your rent for the next 2 years, and a college fund for you. Because, Sophia, what you've been doing here, the strength and determination you've shown, the love you have for your family, that's worth more than any amount of money. That's the kind of character that changes the world. Sophia stared at the check, tears streaming down her face again. But these were different tears. These were tears of relief so profound it felt like being pulled back from the edge of a cliff. Tears of disbelief that bordered on euphoria. Tears of hope flooding back into her heart like sunlight after the longest winter in history. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why would you do this? You don't even know us. You don't know if we're good people or if we deserve help or if—" Robert smiled. And in that smile was the memory of his own childhood, his own immigrant parents working impossible hours for impossible dreams, his own understanding of what it meant to need help and have someone believe in your potential. "Because," he said, "I know what it's like to carry the weight of the world when you're too young to understand that it's not yours to carry alone. And I know that sometimes all it takes is one person believing in you to change everything. Someone believed in me once, when I was not much older than you. Someone saw past my circumstances to my potential, and now it's my turn to be that someone for you." He stood up and pulled a business card from his wallet, a simple white card with his name and direct phone number. "This has my direct number on it. I want you